The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for the third time this cycle, and Ambassador Zexthara could feel the tension crackling through the crystalline chambers like static electricity. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated atmospheric pods, each one maintained at the precise environmental conditions their biology demanded. The humans, as always, sat in the most basic setup, just breathable air and standard gravity. No special requirements, no exotic gases, no temperature controls. Just the basics that most species would find laughably primitive. Sarah Chen, Earth's lead ambassador, sat with her usual calm expression, though Zexthara had learned to read the subtle signs of human emotion over the years. The slight tension around her eyes, the way her fingers drummed once against her niche, she was angry. Very angry. "The motion before us today," announced Prime Arbiter Velter, his voice resonating through the translation matrices, "concerns the recent human military actions in the Kepler Nebula region. 3 Zelithian colonies have filed formal complaints regarding what they term excessive force during the pirate suppression operations." Zexthara watched as Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The humans had been conducting anti-piracy operations in that region for 2 standard years, at the Council's own request. The same pirates that had been terrorizing shipping lanes while Council species argued about jurisdiction and proper protocols. Ambassador Huelneck of the Zelithians rose from his aquatic pod, water cascading down his scaled form. The humans employed kinetic bombardment against suspected pirate bases without proper verification procedures. 17 Zelithian civilian structures were damaged in the process. "Suspected pirate bases that were actively launching attacks on civilian freighters," Sarah replied, her voice level but carrying an edge that made several council members shift uncomfortably. "We followed standard engagement protocols and provided 48-hour evacuation notices to all civilian populations in the target zones." "Your protocols are too aggressive," interjected Ambassador Kexmori of the Centauri Federation. "Proper procedure requires a minimum 14-day verification period, followed by diplomatic attempts at resolution, then another 6 months of committee meetings while those pirates continue raiding supply convoys," Sarah cut him off. "We've been having this same conversation for 5 years. Every time humans take action to protect galactic commerce, we get hauled before this council to explain why we didn't wait longer, try harder, or use less force." The Prime Arbiter raised one of his forearms. "The Council's concern is that human military doctrine appears to prioritize speed and decisive action over careful consideration of all alternatives." Sarah stood up, and something in her posture made the chamber go quiet. "Let me understand this correctly. You called us here because we were too effective at solving a problem you couldn't handle yourselves." "The issue is not effectiveness," replied Ambassador Tealvar of the Rigelian Collective, his artificial voice unit clicking with each word. "The issue is proportionality. Human weapons are concerning. Your kinetic bombardment capabilities alone exceed what most species consider necessary for police actions." "Police actions?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You called it a police action when we were dealing with pirates using stolen Kaleri dreadnoughts and modified vegan plasma cannons. These weren't street criminals, Ambassador. They were organized military units using advanced technology." Zexthara had seen the battle reports. The human fleet had engaged 17 pirate vessels in direct combat, suffering casualties of their own, before moving to eliminate the ground-based launch facilities. The humans had won decisively, yes, but they had paid for that victory in blood. "The concern," Prime Arbiter Velter continued, "is that human military responses tend to be final. Other species prefer solutions that leave room for rehabilitation, redemption, and peaceful resolution." "Other species prefer solutions that don't actually solve anything," Sarah replied bluntly. "The Zelithian colonies are now safe from pirate raids. The shipping lanes are secure. Civilian casualties were minimal despite the pirates using civilian infrastructure as shields. But apparently that's not good enough because we didn't spend 3 years trying to negotiate with terrorists first." Ambassador Yilnith of the Ethereal Communion spoke next, her form shimmering as it phased slightly between dimensions. "We understand human frustration, but there are larger principles at stake. The preservation of life, the importance of due process, the value of seeking peaceful resolutions. These are the foundations of galactic civilization." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Zexthara could see her making some kind of internal calculation. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously calm. "Let me ask you something, Ambassador Yilnith. How many of your merchant vessels have been lost to pirate activity in the past 5 years?" That is not the point of this discussion. Humor me." The ethereal's form flickered with what Zexthara recognized as embarrassment. Ethereal vessels employ phase-shifting technology that makes them difficult to target. We have lost 3 vessels. 3, Sarah nodded. And you, Ambassador Huelneck, how many Zelithian ships? Our losses are regrettable, but... A number, please. 47 civilian vessels and 12 military escorts. Sarah turned to address the entire chamber. Human losses to piracy in the same 5-year period: 312 civilian vessels, 68 military ships, and over 15,000 lives. We've been fighting this war while the rest of you debated proper procedure. The chamber erupted in a chaos of electronic chatter, harmonic frequencies, and chemical releases as various species tried to speak at once. The Prime Arbiter called for order, but Sarah wasn't finished. Every single action we've taken in Council service has been criticized, regulated, or condemned. We provide military support, too aggressive. We offer technological assistance, too disruptive to existing systems. We suggest more efficient solutions to problems. We're told we don't respect traditional methods. Her voice was rising now, carrying across the chamber with a force that made several species instinctively back away. We're the only species in this council that consistently meets our obligations, exceeds our quotas, and delivers results. And every time we do, you punish us for it. Zexthara found himself leaning forward. In all his years serving on the council, he had never seen a human lose their composure like this. It was unsettling. The human perspective is noted, Prime Arbiter Velter said carefully, but this council operates on principles of consensus and collaborative decision-making. No single species, regardless of their military capabilities, should dictate policy for the galaxy. Military capabilities, Sarah repeated the word slowly. Is that what you think this is about? Our weapons? She touched something on her wrist, and suddenly the chamber's central display activated, showing a 3-dimensional star map. Red markers indicated human colonies, trade routes, and military positions throughout the galaxy. Do you see this? She asked, gesturing to the display. Humanity maintains active defense fleets in 17 sectors we don't even inhabit, protecting trade routes we barely use because Council species asked us to. We respond to distress calls from civilizations that have never spoken to us before and will never see us again. We've spent the last 50 years of our galactic membership doing everyone else's dirty work, and we've done it without complaint because we believed in what this council represented. The display zoomed in on the Kepler Nebula region, showing the recent battle sites. Those pirates we eliminated, they were using weapons technology sold to them by 3 different council species, sold illegally in violation of council law for profit. But somehow we're the ones on trial here. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Arms dealing with pirates was one of the most serious crimes in galactic law, punishable by immediate expulsion from the council and complete trade sanctions. That's a serious accusation, Prime Arbiter Velter said slowly. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. We have documented evidence, ship registries, and communication intercepts. We turned all of this information over to Council security 8 months ago. Sarah's smile was razor-sharp. They're still reviewing the evidence. Ambassador Kixmori's breathing apparatus hissed loudly. Even if that were true, it doesn't justify the human approach to problem-solving. Violence should always be the last resort. Violence was the last resort, Sarah replied quietly. We tried your way first. Diplomatic protests, economic sanctions, appeals to the species governments involved. Nothing worked. The pirates got stronger, bolder, and deadlier while we followed proper procedure. So we did what we always do. We fixed the problem ourselves. By destroying everything in your path, Ambassador Tealvar accused. By accepting that some problems can't be talked to death. Sarah's voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on the entire chamber. You want to know what I think? I think this council has grown comfortable with failure. You've built a system where looking like you're trying is more important than actually succeeding, where process matters more than results, where being seen as reasonable is more valuable than being effective. She paused, looking around the chamber at each delegation in turn. And I think you've grown comfortable with letting humans do the hard work while you criticize our methods. You want the benefits of our protection without the moral weight of what protection actually requires. Prime Arbiter Velter's four arms moved in a gesture Zexthara recognized as severe disapproval. The human ambassador seems to be suggesting that this council is somehow dependent on human military intervention. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Check your records. How many major conflicts has this council resolved through pure diplomacy in the last 50 years? How many have been resolved through human intervention? Sarah turned back to the display, bringing up a new set of statistics. Humanitarian crises, pirate suppression, illegal weapons trafficking, territorial disputes, trade route security. Humans have been involved in solving 93% of major galactic problems since we joined this council. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Zexthara found himself checking his own records, and to his growing unease, the human statistics appeared to be accurate. This is precisely the attitude that concerns us, Ambassador Yilnith said, her form solidifying as her emotions intensified. This belief that might makes right, that solutions must be imposed rather than negotiated. Might doesn't make right, Sarah replied. But sometimes it makes possible. You can't negotiate with a plague ambassador. You can't reason with a collapsing star or hold a committee meeting with an asteroid heading for a populated planet. Some problems require action, not discussion. And who decides which problems require action? Demanded Ambassador Huelneck. Who gives humans the right to make those determinations for the rest of us? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but somehow more dangerous than when she had been shouting. You do. Every time you call us for help, every time you request human assistance with a problem you can't solve yourselves, every time you rely on our ships, our weapons, and our people to handle the situations that your own species aren't willing or able to address. She gestured to the display again, and it showed emergency communications records. Hundreds of them, all incoming to human space, all requesting immediate assistance with various crises. We didn't ask to be the galaxy's police force. We didn't volunteer to be the Council's military arm. You made us that by consistently asking us to be the ones who act when action is needed. The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise of environmental systems seemed muted. But apparently, Sarah continued, providing that service comes with a price, every decision we make gets second-guessed, every method we use gets criticized, every victory we achieve gets turned into evidence of our aggression. She looked around the chamber one more time. So here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, humanity is withdrawing from all active Council military operations. We're recalling our fleets from protective duties in non-human space. We're suspending our participation in anti-piracy operations, conflict mediation, and emergency response actions. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Multiple species began speaking at once, their translation matrices creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. But Sarah's voice cut through it all. We're not leaving the Council. We'll continue to participate in trade agreements, scientific collaboration, and diplomatic relations. But we're done being criticized for doing the job you asked us to do. She gathered her materials with practiced efficiency. The next time you have a problem that requires force to solve, you can handle it yourselves. The next time pirates attack a civilian convoy, you can debate proper procedure while people die. The next time a crisis requires immediate action, you can form a committee and spend 6 months deciding what the appropriate response should be. Prime Arbiter Velter finally managed to restore some semblance of order to the chamber. Ambassador Chen, this is not how Council business is conducted. You cannot simply announce a unilateral change to human participation in Council affairs. Sarah paused at the exit to her delegation pod. You're right, Ambassador. This isn't how Council business is conducted. Council business is conducted through endless debate, careful consideration of all possible alternatives, and eventual compromise solutions that satisfy no one and solve nothing. Human business, on the other hand, is conducted by identifying problems and fixing them. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Consider this humanity's resignation from problems that aren't our own. As the door to the human delegation pod sealed shut, the chamber erupted into chaos once again. Zexthara sat in his pod, reviewing the conversation records, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of diplomatic service. genuine fear. Not fear of human aggression or military might, but fear of what the galaxy would look like without it. The humans had been right about one thing. They had been handling the galaxy's problems for 50 years. What was going to happen now that they were done? 3 months after the human withdrawal, Ambassador Zexthara found himself in an emergency meeting that nobody wanted to attend. The gleaming council chambers that had once hummed with dignified debate now felt hollow and desperate. Representatives huddled in small groups, their atmospheric pods creating an eerie maze of different colored gases and electromagnetic fields. The crisis reports kept coming in, each one worse than the last. Sector 7 shipping lanes have been completely abandoned, reported Trade Coordinator Hicksville, her voice translator crackling with static from overuse. Civilian captains refuse to fly routes that human patrols previously protected. We've lost 60% of our inter-system commerce in that region alone. Prime Arbiter Velter's forearms moved in agitation as he reviewed the data streams flowing across his neural interface. The numbers were staggering. Without human military presence, piracy had exploded across 17 different sectors. What had been isolated incidents before were now organized campaigns, with pirate fleets growing bolder by the week. The Vorthan Syndicate has claimed the entire Outer Rim as their territory, continued Hicksville. They're demanding tribute from any vessel wanting to pass through systems that used to be under human protection. Ambassador Yilnith's ethereal form flickered with distress. Surely our own species' defense forces can handle common criminals. The silence that followed was answer enough. Zexthara had seen the reports. The Zilithians had lost 4 military vessels in their first week of attempting independent anti-piracy operations. The Centauri Federation had managed to engage a small pirate group and achieved what they charitably called a tactical stalemate, which meant they had been forced to retreat after losing half their fleet. The Rigelian Collective had simply refused to deploy their ships beyond their home system. There's more, Hicksville said, her voice growing smaller. The Kalari Independence Movement has seized control of 3 industrial planets in the Margan system. They're using human-designed weapons they captured from a decommissioned depot. Human weapons? Prime Arbiter Velter's voice sharpened. How did they acquire human military technology? Zexthara cleared his throat. The weapons depot was one of 17 facilities that humans maintained throughout Council space for rapid response operations. When they withdrew, they sealed the facilities and requested instructions for disposal. The Council Security Committee has been deliberating on proper procedures for the past 2 months. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air like poison gas. While the Council debated what to do with human military assets, various criminal and insurgent groups had simply taken them. The humans had offered to destroy the facilities themselves before withdrawing, but the Council had insisted on maintaining custody of all strategic resources. What about the Plague Worlds incident? Asked Ambassador Kexmori, his breathing apparatus working overtime in his agitation. Please tell me we have that situation under control. Hicksville's report display flickered to show the Epsilon Eridani system, where a biological weapon deployed by terrorists had infected 7 planets with a rapidly spreading disease. The quarantine is holding, but barely. The infected populations are significant, approximately 40 million individuals across all affected worlds. And our relief efforts? Minimal. Each species' medical corps insists on conducting their own separate assessment before deployment. The ethereal communion wants to phase shift the entire infected population to a parallel dimension for treatment. The Zelithians are demanding we flood the planet's atmospheres with their specific therapeutic compounds. The Centaurians insist on building sterile orbital medical stations before any direct intervention. Zexthara felt his inner temperature drop. How long will these assessments take? Current estimates range from 8 months to 3 years, depending on which committee recommendations are accepted. The chamber erupted into the familiar chaos of multiple species speaking simultaneously, but this time the sounds carried a note of panic that Zexthara had never heard before. These weren't academic debates about proper procedure anymore. These were life-and-death situations spiraling completely out of control. What would the humans have done? The question came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Tealvar of the Rigelian Collective, whose species had been among the most vocal critics of human methods. Hicksville consulted her records. Based on previous similar incidents, human crisis response teams would have deployed within 48 hours. Their medical corps would have established treatment centers on each affected planet simultaneously. Their military would have enforced the quarantine and eliminated the terrorist cells responsible. Estimated timeline for containing the outbreak, 6 to 8 weeks. But they would have used their aggressive tactics, protested Ambassador Hewellneck. Forced evacuations, military occupation of sovereign worlds, unilateral decision-making without proper council oversight. And 40 million people would be receiving treatment instead of dying, Teelvar replied bluntly. The argument that followed was intense but brief. There was no escaping the reality that their carefully considered, diplomatically appropriate responses were not working. While they debated proper procedures, entire civilizations were suffering. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Yilnath carefully, we should consider requesting human assistance with these specific crises, not a resumption of their general military involvement, but targeted intervention for humanitarian purposes. Prime Arbiter Velter's arms moved in what Zexthara recognized as reluctant consideration. The humans did indicate they would continue participating in diplomatic relations. They might be willing to discuss limited cooperation. Who's going to ask them? Demanded Ambassador Kexmori. Which one of us is going to go to the humans and admit that we can't handle these situations without their help? Another uncomfortable silence filled the chamber. Everyone present had participated in criticizing human methods just months earlier. The idea of requesting aid from a species they had essentially expelled from galactic security operations was professionally humiliating and politically dangerous. "I'll do it," Zexthara heard himself say, surprised by his own words. "My species has maintained neutral relations with humanity. I can approach their delegation without it appearing to be a formal council admission of dependency." The relief in the chamber was palpable, though no one wanted to express it directly. 2 days later, Zexthara found himself in the human diplomatic quarter, a section of the station that had always seemed strangely sparse compared to other species' elaborate embassy complexes. The humans maintained simple, functional spaces. No atmospheric displays, no cultural exhibitions, no statements of wealth or power. Just clean, efficient work areas. Ambassador Chen received him in a conference room that could have belonged to any species. The furniture adapted automatically to his physiology, the lighting adjusted to his visual spectrum, and the air carried no scent markers or chemical signatures. It was, Zexthara realized, a room designed to make any visitor comfortable rather than to showcase human culture. "Ambassador Zexthara," Sarah said, offering him a beverage that he was surprised to discover was perfectly formulated for his species' biochemistry. "I understand you wanted to discuss some ongoing situations." There was no hostility in her manner, but there was also no warmth. She was polite, professional, and completely neutral. Somehow, that was more unsettling than anger would have been. "The Council is facing several complex challenges," Zexthara began carefully. "Situations that might benefit from experienced consultation." "Consultation," Sarah repeated the word as if testing its flavor. "What kind of consultation?" Zexthara activated his personal display, showing her the crisis reports. She reviewed them in silence, her expression unchanging as the scope of the disasters became clear. 40 million infected across 7 worlds, she said finally. "How long since the outbreak started?" 14 weeks. 14 weeks. She was quiet for a long moment. "Our crisis response protocols would have had treatment centers operational within 72 hours of the initial outbreak. We would have had the terrorist cells responsible in custody within a week and the biological weapon neutralized within a month. The Council is concerned about respecting planetary sovereignty and ensuring proper oversight of military operations." Sarah's laugh was short and bitter. "Planetary sovereignty. Tell me, Ambassador, how much sovereignty do those 40 million infected people have while they're dying from a biological weapon?" Zexthara felt his internal temperature fluctuate with discomfort. "The Council is doing everything possible within established legal frameworks." "No, they're not. They're doing everything politically safe within established legal frameworks. There's a difference." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Let me guess, 17 different medical committees, each insisting on their own approach, none of them willing to begin treatment until they've achieved consensus on the optimal methodology." The accuracy of her assessment was painful. The Council values thorough consideration of all alternatives. The Council values appearing responsible more than being effective. Sarah turned off her display and looked at him directly. What exactly are you asking me for, Ambassador? The moment had come for honesty. The Council needs human intervention to resolve these crises. That is, the current approaches are not producing adequate results within acceptable timeframes. And what happens after we fix these problems for you? Do we get called before another emergency session to explain why our methods were too aggressive? Do we get criticized for not following proper procedure while saving those 40 million lives? Zexthara had hoped to avoid this conversation, but he could see there was no way around it. The Council recognizes that previous criticisms may have been premature. Premature? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Ambassador, let me explain something to you about human psychology. When someone asks us for help, we help. It's not complicated. We don't calculate political advantage or worry about who gets credit. We see a problem and we fix it. She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the station's central plaza. But when someone asks for our help and then punishes us for providing it, we learn not to offer help anymore. Humanity could demonstrate leadership by rising above past disagreements. Sarah turned back to face him, and there was something in her expression that made Zexthara instinctively want to retreat. Leadership? You want us to demonstrate leadership by repeatedly accepting blame for doing what you asked us to do. The Council would be prepared to offer certain assurances. What kind of assurances? Zexthara activated his diplomatic protocols, delivering the carefully prepared proposal. Full operational authority for human forces during crisis response. No real-time oversight requirements. Post-action review limited to results assessment rather than methodology criticism. For these specific crises. Yes. And then what? We solve your immediate problems, and next year when new crises arise, we're back to requesting permission for every action and justifying every decision to a committee. Zexthara didn't have a good answer for that because they both knew it was exactly what would happen. The Council's fundamental structure hadn't changed. Their philosophical approach to problem-solving hadn't evolved. They were asking humans to fix immediate problems while maintaining the same system that had created those problems. The Council operates on principles of consensus and collaborative decision-making, he said finally, knowing how weak it sounded. The Council operates on principles of avoiding responsibility, Sarah replied. You want the problems solved, but you don't want to make the hard decisions necessary to solve them. You want someone else to bear the moral weight of effective action. She returned to her seat and pulled up her own display. Here's what's going to happen, Ambassador. Those 40 million people are going to die while your medical committees debate treatment protocols. The pirate fleets are going to grow stronger and more organized until they control entire sectors of space. The terrorist organizations are going to acquire more advanced weapons and become regional powers. And eventually, when the situation becomes so desperate that even the Council can't ignore it anymore, you're going to ask us to intervene. Surely humanitarian concerns would motivate human assistance regardless of political considerations. Sarah's smile was sad rather than angry. Do you know what the human casualty rate was during our 50 years of Council service? Military personnel killed in the line of duty protecting Council interests. Zexthara didn't, and he was suddenly afraid to find out. 137,000 human military personnel, dead in the service of protecting species that spent their time criticizing our methods. Her voice was steady, but there was pain underneath it. We bled for you, we died for you, and you never said thank you. You just told us we were doing it wrong. The weight of that statement settled over the room like gravity. Zexthara had never considered the human cost of their protection. In all the debates about proper procedure and diplomatic protocols, the actual casualties had been footnotes in reports rather than people with families and futures. The Council was not aware. The Council didn't want to be aware, because acknowledging our casualties would have meant acknowledging that the problems you asked us to solve were dangerous, that effective solutions require sacrifice, that security isn't free. Sarah stood up again, and Zexthara realized the meeting was over. You want to save those 40 million people, stop holding committee meetings and start taking action. You want to stop the pirates, stop worrying about proper procedure and start shooting back. You want to prevent terrorist attacks, stop trying to rehabilitate terrorists and start eliminating them. And if the Council is unwilling to take such actions, Sarah walked him to the door. Then you'll learn what the galaxy looks like without human intervention. You'll discover how much you were depending on our willingness to do the things you weren't willing to do yourselves. She paused at the threshold. Give my regards to the Council, Ambassador, and my condolences to those 40 million people whose lives are worth less than your political principles. As Zexthara made his way back through the station corridors, he found himself wondering if this was what collapse looked like. Not a dramatic explosion or violent conquest, but a slow realization that the system you had built was fundamentally incapable of protecting the people it claimed to serve. The humans had been the foundation holding up galactic civilization, and they had spent 50 years criticizing that foundation for being too strong, too aggressive, too effective. Now they were discovering what happened when the Foundation walked away. By the time he reached his own quarters, the emergency alerts were already coming in. 3 more systems had fallen to pirate control, the biological outbreak had spread to 2 additional worlds, and terrorist attacks had struck civilian targets in 4 different sectors. The galaxy was learning what quiet looked like, and the cost was measured in millions of lives. 6 months after the human withdrawal, the Council chambers had become a monument to failure. Where once 47 species had gathered for productive debate, now only 31 delegations remained active. 16 civilizations had either withdrawn from Council participation or had been overrun by forces they could no longer resist. Ambassador Zexthara reviewed the casualty reports with growing horror. The Epsilon Eridani plague had claimed 63 million lives before burning itself out through lack of hosts. The Pirate Confederation now controlled 40% of previously Council-protected space. Terrorist organizations had evolved into insurgent governments, claiming sovereignty over dozens of systems. But it was the economic data that truly revealed the scope of the collapse. Galactic trade had shrunk to less than 30% of pre-withdrawal levels. Entire sectors had reverted to subsistence economies as interstellar commerce became too dangerous to maintain. Advanced technologies that required multi-system supply chains were disappearing as isolated worlds could no longer access necessary resources. The Rigelian Collective has officially requested placement under human protection, announced Trade Coordinator Hicksville, her voice translator carrying harmonics of despair. They're offering exclusive mining rights to their rare earth deposits in exchange for security guarantees. Prime Arbiter Velter's 4 arms moved in the gesture that Zexthara had learned meant complete resignation. What was the human response? Standard diplomatic acknowledgement, no commitment to action. It had become a pattern. Desperate species offering increasingly valuable concessions to humanity in exchange for the protection they had once criticized. The humans received each offer with polite neutrality, filed the requests in proper diplomatic channels, and did nothing. The Centauri Federation has lost another 3 core worlds to the Shadowfall Rebellion, continued Hicksville. They're requesting immediate military intervention. Human response? Suggestion that they bring the matter before the Council for proper consideration. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The humans were now suggesting that crisis resolution should follow the same bureaucratic procedures that had proven utterly ineffective. They were forcing the Council to confront their own broken system by refusing to bypass it anymore. Ambassador Yilnath materialized more solidly than usual, her ethereal form stabilizing as her emotions intensified. Surely we can appeal to human compassion. These are humanitarian disasters. We tried that, replied Ambassador Kexmori bitterly. Remember the orphaned world's crisis. 17 planets left without government after the plague collapsed their civilizations. We sent formal humanitarian appeals to every human colony, embassy, and trade post. And food supplies, medical aid, and temporary infrastructure support. Everything except what we actually needed. Security forces to maintain order and protection from scavenger fleets. Kixmori's breathing apparatus hissed with frustration. They'll help people who are already suffering, but they won't prevent the suffering anymore. Zexthara had studied the human response pattern extensively. Humanitarian aid, yes. Medical assistance, certainly. Disaster relief, absolutely. But no military intervention, no police actions, no use of force to solve problems. It was as if humanity had decided to become a galactic charity organization rather than the security force they had been. We need to face facts, said Ambassador Teelvar, his artificial voice unit clicking with mechanical precision. The galaxy needs human military protection to function. We've been operating under that protection for so long that we forgot how to protect ourselves. The admission hung in the chamber like a toxic gas. For 50 years, Council species had developed their civilizations, their technologies, and their societies under the umbrella of human security. They had focused on art, philosophy, trade, and diplomacy, while humans handled the ugly necessities of violence and force. Now they were discovering that all their cultural achievements meant nothing if they couldn't protect them. The human withdrawal has revealed something uncomfortable about our civilization, continued Teelvar. We've become dependent on a species we simultaneously resented for being willing to do what we wouldn't do ourselves. Ambassador Huelneck's aquatic pod bubbled with agitation. Dependence implies choice. We never chose this arrangement. Humans simply assumed the role of galactic enforcers. Did they? Zexthara found himself speaking before he had consciously decided to. I've been reviewing 50 years of Council records. Every single military deployment, every crisis intervention, every use of force, all of them were requested by Council species. The humans never acted unilaterally until we criticized them for acting at all. He activated his display, showing the chronological record of human military interventions. Kaleri Civil War, requested by the Kaleri government. Vegan Pirate Crisis, requested by the Vegan Trade Consortium. Rigelian Rebellion, requested by the Rigelian Collective. Epsilon Terrorist Campaign, requested by the Epsilon Colonial Assembly. The list went on for several minutes. In 50 years of service, humans initiated independent military action exactly 0 times. They were always responding to requests from Council species. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled in. The humans hadn't seized the role of galactic enforcers. It had been given that role, request by request, crisis by crisis, until it became their default function. But they could have refused, protested Ambassador Yilnith. They could have insisted on collaborative solutions. Collaborative solutions that never worked, Zexthara replied. Look at the pre-human crisis resolution records. Average time to resolve military conflicts through Council diplomacy, 4 years and 3 months. Average duration of humanitarian crises before effective intervention, 6 years and 7 months. Human average, 43 days. The mathematical brutality of the comparison was devastating. The humans hadn't just been more effective, they had been orders of magnitude more effective. While Council species spent years debating proper responses, humans had been saving lives and solving problems. The question, said Prime Arbiter Velter slowly, is whether we can develop our own effective crisis response capabilities. Trade Coordinator Hicksville consulted her data streams. Current estimates for developing independent Council military forces sufficient for galactic security. Minimum 15 years, assuming full cooperation from all member species and unlimited resource allocation. And the cost? Approximately 40% of current galactic economic output, redirected to military research and production. The number was staggering. Achieving what humans had provided for free would require restructuring galactic civilization around warfare and security instead of culture and trade. They would have to become what they had criticized humans for being. There is another option, said Ambassador Kexmori reluctantly. Complete capitulation, formal acknowledgement of human authority in all matters relating to galactic security. The reaction was explosive. Multiple species began speaking at once, their translation matrices creating a chaos of objections, protests, and accusations. But underneath the noise, Zexthara could sense a growing recognition that they were running out of alternatives. Surrender our sovereignty to a single species, demanded Ambassador Huelneck. Accept permanent subordination to human military authority. What sovereignty? Teelvar replied bluntly. Half our member species have already been conquered or collapsed. The other half are hiding behind increasingly ineffective defenses, waiting for the next attack. We have sovereignty over nothing except our own destruction. The brutal honesty of the statement cut through the diplomatic protests. The Council had become a debating society for civilizations that could no longer defend themselves, making decisions that no one had the power to enforce. Perhaps, suggested Yilnith carefully, we could propose a new arrangement. formal recognition of human authority over security matters, with council oversight of all other galactic affairs. Council oversight. Prime Arbiter Velter tested the phrase. And what happens when security matters conflict with other council decisions? When human military requirements contradict our economic policies or diplomatic initiatives? Then we defer to human judgment, Zexthara said quietly, because their judgment has consistently produced better results than our democratic processes. The admission was painful, but it was also true. In crisis after crisis, human military commanders had made better decisions faster than council committees. They had saved more lives, prevented more conflicts, and resolved more problems than 50 years of collaborative diplomacy. You're suggesting we abandon the principles this council was founded on, protested Ambassador Huelneck. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that our principles have failed, Zexthara replied. Good intentions don't stop biological weapons. Proper procedure doesn't defeat pirate fleets. Consensus building doesn't save lives when time matters more than politics. He stood up, feeling older than his species' typical lifespan. We spent 50 years criticizing humans for being too quick to use force, too willing to make hard decisions, too focused on results instead of process. We never asked ourselves what the galaxy would look like without that force, those decisions, and those results. The chamber's display activated, showing the current state of galactic civilization. Red zones indicating pirate control, yellow areas marking active conflicts, gray sectors representing collapsed governments. The green areas, safe, stable, protected space, had shrunk to a fraction of what they had been 6 months earlier. This is what our principles accomplished, Zexthara continued. This is the galaxy we created by insisting that process matters more than outcome, that debate is more important than action, that appearing reasonable is more valuable than being effective. He turned to face the Prime Arbiter directly. The humans offered us a choice 6 months ago. We could accept their methods and benefit from their protection, or we could reject their methods and handle problems ourselves. We chose rejection. Now we're learning what that choice actually costs. Prime Arbiter Velter's arms moved in what Zexthara recognized as profound sadness. And what do you propose we do with this knowledge? We beg them to come back, Zexthara said simply. We admit that we were wrong, that we need their protection, and that we're willing to accept their methods without criticism. We offer them whatever they want in exchange for restoring galactic security. And if they refuse? Zexthara looked at the display again, at the spreading chaos that had consumed half of known space. Then we learn to live in the galaxy we created. A galaxy where good intentions matter more than good results, where proper procedure is more important than saving lives, and where civilizations die while we debate the appropriate response. The emergency session ended without resolution, as most council sessions did now. But as the delegations dispersed to their respective quarters, Zexthara noticed something that confirmed his worst fears. Several species had begun private communications with human diplomatic posts. They weren't waiting for council consensus anymore. They were seeking individual protection agreements. The council was fragmenting, not from external conquest, but from internal recognition that their collective approach had failed. Species were abandoning shared governance in favor of bilateral arrangements with the one civilization that had proven capable of providing security. 3 days later, Zexthara received a private communication from Ambassador Chen. The message was brief and professional. The human delegation has received multiple requests for individual protection agreements. We wanted to inform the Council that we are considering these proposals on a case-by-case basis. It was, Zexthara realized, humanity's final diplomatic courtesy. They were telling the Council that they were prepared to provide protection to species willing to accept human authority, while leaving the Council itself to manage whatever remained of their collective independence. The choice was becoming clear: accept human protection and human authority, or maintain Council independence and face the consequences alone. More and more species were choosing protection. Within a month, 23 species had signed individual security agreements with humanity. The terms were surprisingly reasonable. Humans would provide military protection and crisis response in exchange for access to resources and strategic locations. Most importantly, human forces would operate without oversight or criticism from Council authorities. The civilizations that joined these bilateral arrangements prospered immediately. Pirate attacks ceased, trade routes reopened, and security returned to levels not seen since the withdrawal. The species that remained loyal to Council principles continued to struggle with escalating crises and declining capabilities. Ambassador Zexthara spent his final days in the Council reviewing the historical records, trying to understand where they had gone wrong. The answer, he realized, had been there from the beginning. They had built their civilization on the assumption that reasonable people could always find reasonable solutions to unreasonable problems. They had believed that good intentions and proper procedures could overcome any challenge. The humans had understood something that Council species had forgotten. Sometimes problems could only be solved by people willing to do unreasonable things. Sometimes good intentions weren't enough. Sometimes proper procedure was just another way of avoiding difficult decisions. As he prepared to submit his own species' application for human protection, Zexthara reflected on the galaxy they were leaving behind. The Council would continue to exist, of course. Some species would maintain their commitment to collaborative decision-making and consensus building. But they would be governing an increasingly irrelevant organization, making decisions for territories they could no longer protect, debating policies they lacked the power to enforce. The humans had walked away in absolute quiet, without threats or ultimatums. They had simply stopped doing what the Council criticized them for doing. And in that silence, galactic civilization had discovered how much it depended on the very qualities it had condemned. The cost of that discovery was measured in the collapse of ideals, the abandonment of principles, and the recognition that survival sometimes required accepting uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, protection, and the price of peace. In the end, the Council had learned that you could have a galaxy governed by noble principles or a galaxy that actually worked. But you couldn't have both.